1975 through 1980 is a mysterious unit, that's for sure. Many people fail to understand this guy and replace him with a set of SUs or a Weber conversion. All that's really unnecessary. A lot of people swear at these things, take the automatic chokes off, put on a hand choke, swear at these things. These things do catch fire. If the automatic choke comes loose, it drips gasoline onto the catalytic converter. Because this comes loose, it causes the carburetor to run rich. Because it runs rich, the catalytic converter glows red hot. So they've caught on fire. A lot of them have. These carburetors have a bad name. But just like everything else, it's certainly possible to repair the carburetor, to fix it back up to standard, to make it work just the way it's supposed to. In fact, it's pretty easy. We'll show you how. First thing I'm going to do here is just strip this carburetor down so that we can look at it a little more carefully. Take off this extra heater hose. There's a lot of things involved with the car running correctly. The first thing is all the emission control systems. The smog pump, the fitted, the charcoal canister, all the hoses, all the vacuum lines that run to and from units underneath the bonnet. They're all necessary to be in absolutely excellent working order to even begin to tune up the car. The engine has to be in good shape, and the ignition has to be in good shape. Those are four distinct items. The emissions, the engine, the ignition, and finally the carburation. After everything else is sorted out, then you can worry about the carburetor. A lot of people blame this carburetor for the way their car runs. Damn Strombergs. But even though deserved, it sometimes isn't the case in that person's car. Maybe something else is wrong with the tune-up. But once you get to the Stromberg carburetor, there are a number of things that you can do to clean this guy up, to make him operate correctly, and get him nice and clean. I'm going to finish taking this off. Cut. Well, that was easy. Now here's our carburetor. Remember, you don't touch the carburetor until the other three parts of this tune-up are done. The emissions, the engine, the ignition. After all that, then do this guy. Here we go. The Stromberg carburetor has to do four things. It has to start the car when it's cold. That's why we have a choke. It enriches the mixture. This carburetor has to be able to run at a number of various speeds. It has to idle, and it has to have an accelerator pump, or at least it has to enrich in the mixture at the point of acceleration. This carburetor, called a variable choke carburetor, does all those things. Plus it's got an extra port over here for emissions, a spring-loaded valve on the back side, which is also for emissions, and the automatic part of the automatic choke is also for emissions. The government doesn't trust you to turn this choke off as quickly as this unit will. And in fact, if this unit is operating correctly, it'll do a wonderful job of starting your car and warming it up, and you don't have to fiddle with a hand choke. It does work if it's cleaned and operated properly. The couple of complaints with the carburetor are that the amount of oil down here is drawn out within a matter of days, sometimes a matter of hours, sometimes a matter of weeks, far more frequently than it should be. This takes engine oil. It doesn't make any difference what kind of oil, as it is important to have oil in there. I found brake fluid in there. You don't want brake fluid in here. There's no point in putting transmission fluid in here. That's too lightweight. 3-in-1 oil is too lightweight. Use engine oil. If you don't mind foraging in the trash at the gas station, somebody's already left you just a little bit of oil in the bottom of a can in the trash. So get it out, unscrew this, fill this until it's overflowing. Filling this up doesn't have to be a tedious procedure that takes half an hour. Just fill it up until it's overflowing. Push this guy back into it. The oil that washes over the unit will keep it nice and greasy and keep everything oiled. Works just fine. The other complaint is that the automatic choke doesn't work, fails to come on, fails to go off, is loose, holds the idle high, holds the idle low. The two major complaints of the carburetor. Well, let's begin by removing the carburetor. This is the piston, which is inside the dash pot. This is actually a shock absorber. At the point of acceleration, the vacuum at the bottom of this floating piston in here, the vacuum at the back of that changes dramatically. Normally the reaction of the piston would be to rise very, very quickly. This keeps it from rising quickly. It's a shock absorber. It has to have oil in it. Cut. Of course, prior to this, we've dropped off the automatic choke, the heat mass, which we'll attend to later on. The suction chamber comes off with 4 1032 by ½ inch screws, lock washers. Always put in new screws, always fit new screws. 1032 by ½ inch with number 10 lock washers. These screws very often are buggered up. There's no problem at all if we were doing this in the vise, as we should. All that would be necessary is to put the screwdriver on top of the screw and hit it with a hammer. Hit it hard. You can't break this guy. Hit him hard, and then you're able to unscrew the screw. Here's the top of our suction chamber. The spring. This is a correctly linked spring. It isn't this long. Sometimes your friend who knows all about racing and Stromberg carburetors pulls these springs out about that long. Then you have to buy a new one. This is just fine. Here we have our piston, diaphragm, and metering needle. These are two of the critically important parts of the carburetor. One must make certain that the diaphragm is neither expanded nor perforated. And although it sounds like some dreadful safe sex ad, you should always carry a diaphragm in your car, because Don Zarco doesn't have this in his stock. And if you get a hole in this, there's no way out except to change it. Carry an extra diaphragm in your car. The metering needle at the bottom wears out after 35,000 miles. They all need to be changed. That's a rule, to which there are few exceptions. We'll take apart this piston next. Cut. The piston comes apart pretty easily. There are 4 self-tapping screws. Don't know what size these guys are. Don't lose them. These 4 self-tappers hold down a steel plate. That steel plate, in turn, hold a plastic plate, which in turn holds the diaphragm against the piston. Now, both the inside and outside circumference of the diaphragm have small rubber tags on them. And although it's very difficult to see, there is a tag here on the inside, and here is the tag on the outside. It is essential that those tags be placed into the corresponding holes in both the piston and under the suction chamber on the carburetor body, so that the alignment of this piston is correct. The 2 holes here at the bottom, the vent holes, must be in line with the airflow. In this case, the airflow would be going this way because the pistons are to the rear of the airflow. Two tools are necessary to remove the piston, to remove the needle from the piston. The Stromberg tool, which is absolutely essential to have. It's an 1/8" Allen wrench. You can get that anywhere, but what you can't get, of course, is this guy. So thank the guys who designed this and pay them for it. Buy one. Here's a ground-off screwdriver that fits down into the slot with which I can remove the spring-loaded grub screw. This grub screw is spring-loaded, very unusual, and I'm not sure why, but the end of the grub screw is spring-loaded. Very strange. Now the needle comes out of the bottom of the piston. The needle has a barrel at its top, the needle at the bottom. There's a spring on the inside of the unit, and there's a small wire across the top of the barrel that keeps the needle from popping further up into the barrel. Once in a blue moon, this needle is bent or pulled out of the way, and the needle is able to rise up into the barrel so that the shoulder of the needle, the square edge, which should always be exposed, sometimes that falls up above into this barrel, and there's nothing you can do to lean the carburetor out. It runs rich all the time. On this needle here, there's obviously a worn side and an unworn side, quite a scoop out of one side in the direction of the spring loading. Now we can remove the adjuster screw, which fits into the needle. There's a threaded portion inside this barrel of the needle. We can remove the screw, which is turned by this Allen wrench. I've constructed a nifty little special tool out of a piece of old brake line. A nice bubble end on it. Place that bubble end into the piston and very carefully drive out this screw, which is the adjuster screw, and then, more importantly, this small star washer here. Do not lose the star washer. Around the outside of the screw is an O-ring, which you can take off with a sharp pick, grease it up, and put on a new O-ring. Cut. And of course, to remove the O-ring, we need a sharp pick, which can be used to pull the O-ring off. Now we have a new O-ring, which we can fit onto the small brass piece. Cut. Now to place this back into the piston, we use a liberal amount of red grease here on the top. Any grease is just fine. If you don't have grease, oil is fine. You must provide lubrication. Here comes our small star washer on top. We use our same tool used with the brake line. To drive him home, but not to smash him too heavily, that's certain. Make sure he's free. Now we can fit the new needle. Place the needle into the bottom, press it up, place the spring-loaded grub screw in place. Press on the barrel of the needle while turning. It will catch, and the barrel will become drawn into the underside of the piston. Cut. And finally, it becomes caught, and there's a limit to how far or how tightly you can turn the wrench. Snug up the grub screw. Give the adjuster one more pop. How about 3 more pops? Make sure that he's seated correctly, and then back the needle off until the barrel is flush with the piston, bottom of the piston. Cut. Now with each of these items, of course, you want to clean them off with spray carburetor cleaner. These pieces will magically become brighter as the session goes on, because I get to clean it, all the pieces, while the camera is off. But of course, make everything as clean as you can with carburetor cleaner. Cleanliness is next to godliness in this carburetor, and every single component should be as clean as you can possibly get it. Now we'll fit a new diaphragm. Make sure that the tag on the bottom of the carburetor corresponds with the tag on the piston. Refit the plastic in the metal band. Place the screws in place. Start all 4 ever so loosely. And finally, ensure that the tag is, yes, absolutely positively, in the right position. Which it is. And tighten up the screws. At this point, our piston will be done. Nothing more to do with the piston. Of course, this can be done whether the carburetor is on the car or off the car. In fact, when we do a tune-up at University Motors, we take the piston out and do to it just what you've seen here, although we don't always change the needle. Certainly clean it up, change the diaphragm, and certainly always, at every opportunity, change that O-ring. Now our piston is complete, although dirty. Cut. Now we'll work on our automatic choke. The heat mask comes off with 3 screws. 1, 2, 3 screws are often stripped out. You can make them bite a little more tightly by removing their lock washers so they sit into their threads a little more deeply than necessary, or than they did before. Certainly not more than necessary. You've got to hold them tight. Sometimes it's necessary to go to a larger thread. Sometimes I've seen sheet metal screws used here. It seems very crude, but you must get a bite on this and hold it. Whatever you do, do it carefully. Once the heat mask comes off, then we're left with the choke proper. This choke is secured to the side of the unit by 3 copper colored, slotted 1032 flathead screws. Now the base of the screw is a little unusual, rather the head of the base. And if you're going to use a replacement screw, buy a 1032 round head and shape the sides of it so it matches the other ones. The choke here has a finger which moves. This choke finger controls the mixture by moving the needle up and down. The position of this finger is controlled by the heat mass, the spring on the heat mass. Now, how could this tiny little spring overcome such an enormous spring tension here? Well, when the car is running, the air piston, which is very difficult to get a hold of, we'll try again here, the air piston pops out to an open position, and this guy now sits anywhere he wants, and he only falls here by gravity. So when the car is running, this air piston is popped all the way back, allowing this finger to move wherever it wants with no spring loading. Get the remainder of the choke off and lay our carburetor to the side. Our 3 screws, copper colored, 1032. We have a gasket here. Now the rule is don't lose the gasket. Don't ruin the gasket. You have to buy a whole carburetor kit to buy this gasket. And if you're just servicing the choke while it's on the car, save that gasket. Save that gasket, and when you reinstall this gasket, coat him with red grease. I keep talking about red grease. University Motors red grease. Any kind of grease is just fine. Spray carburetor cleaner on the choke. Down inside of vent holes in here. Round and round and round until it gets wonderfully clean. Cut. Now this guy is working nice and properly. The axle in the middle that allows the cams to work is held fast by this nut on the rear. The axle is most often loose. Tighten it up with a pair of vice grips on the axle. 5/16 socket on the bottom. Snug this guy up as tight as he'll go. Ensure this guy is operating nice and smoothly. Cam is able to work independently of it. And then I dose the whole thing in WD-40. Just wash it in WD-40. Cut. We use a spray penetrant here, but the point is to load it, get down every orifice, inside everywhere, make it drip with WD-40. Now he's working wonderfully well, and we can continue. The next most important item is the heat mass. The heat mass is often incorrectly calibrated, or it's been turned so many times that the bimetal strip on the inside begins to pick up a different position than is indicated properly on the outside circumference. And sometimes the mark on this one, for instance, is barely discernible underneath all the oxidation. One would hardly even recognize it as a factory marking, just as this one. We're going to recalibrate this and make a much heavier marking so that getting it correctly placed is easy. Cut. Now, removing this nut is never as simple as simply turning it. We'll show you later some of the tricks. Remove that bolt, whose thread I have no idea what it is, although I expect I'll find out soon, and then pop apart the heat mass. Cut. Popping this guy is never as easy as this, that's for sure. Here we have the old O-ring. Our water jacket. Do not crack these boys. Don't put these in a vise. Don't crack them off. You have to buy a whole other heat mask from someplace you used one. Very expensive. Getting them welded up is a real problem. Here's the guy that we're after. So what we're going to do is place him in a bowl of water, heat him up, and watch the position of the bimetal strip as it comes around. As it turns clockwise and the water reaches boiling, we'll make a new mark on the outside circumference with a hacksaw so that refitting this to the automatic choke is not a problem as far as calibration. Cut. After we've calibrated the unit, simply our wonderful red grease again around the circumference where the O-ring rides, our new O-ring. Grease down the thread so that the next time this guy comes apart as easily as it appeared. Our cover. More red grease on the threads of the bolt. And now we're set to reinstall our heat mask on the outside of the carburetor. As long as we put our adjusting ring on. No demonstration is complete without flaw. That's my flaw there. Here we go. Now we can get him back on and rotate him very easily to get the hose connections correct. Cut. Now back to the carburetor body. We've taken care so far of the piston on the top, and we've taken care of the piston on the top, and we've taken care of the automatic choke. There's several more things here in the carburetor which we must attend to. The air bleed on the side, which is often mistaken for a tuning device, is in fact an emissions device. This allows fresh air to enter the airflow after the jetting, after the mixture. But the amount of air is so tiny that it has very little to do with the way the car runs, mostly how much carbon monoxide the car emits. Taking this guy apart is relatively easy. Again, make certain that you save the old gasket unless you have a new one in the gasket kit. Snapping the cap off is a flash. Except to those uninitiated. The screw comes out of the top. It has O-rings on it. The white plastic nut comes out of the body. It has an O-ring on it. Both can be changed. We're going to lay this guy off to the side. But you can imagine changing the O-rings. In fact, for us today, we're going to lock this guy all the way down tight. The nut is all the way tight. The screw is all the way tight. We don't want any air bleeding through here. Not for the kind of tune-up that we're going to do. Now we're left with the carburetor body. We can remove the float bowl at the bottom. 6 screws. These screws can be used as adjuster screws on the carburetor body. It's the same thread. That's where our supply of new adjuster screws comes from, because the adjuster screws on the body are most often broken. Some of these float bowls have the brass ring on them. Some of them, the later ones, are completely cast. It's very rare to see one leak, but sometimes they do. When you're rebuilding the carburetor and have it off the car as we do here, it's necessary to remove this O-ring up in here, but it can't be done until the float bowl has been removed. Remember that the judicious use of the hammer is the secret to the MG trade. Didn't even have to use it, we scared it away. Now, we can remove the plug in the bottom. Sorry. Although this may be a difficult way to remove this and then to get the O-ring off. Another option is to use a socket, in this case an 11/16, that once this is in place, the 11/16 socket is placed over the inside and the bottom virtually falls away. Then change the O-ring I use these dentist tools, wonderfully handy, but you must not pierce the O-ring. We're going to refit him since we don't have a new one at our command. A little bit of red grease always makes it fit a lot more nicely. Snap him back up into our float bowl. Now we take a look at the bottom of our carburetor. Again, we have a gasket, which, if you're careful, sometimes you can save. A gasket can be reused as long as you use grease on it. Now your options here in gasket use include oil. I'm having a difficult time here with just this one corner of my gasket. Try it coming up the other way, maybe that'll help. No, we're going to lose this gasket. And now it's a matter of trying to get as much of the old gasket off as possible without injuring oneself. Anyway, this gasket can be fit with grease, it can be fit with oil. You shouldn't fit it dry, but of course you can fit it that way. Never ever use silicone gasket compound on anything having to do with the gasoline system. If so, the silicone will ball off and get involved, get caught in the bottom of the jet. We've seen it. Now we can check the float height. The float height is the distance from here to here. Most easily checked out with a small pair of calipers. Sometimes in the kit itself there's a piece of cardboard. We'll lift the floats away. Now we expose our needle and seat here at the bottom, which is one of the only places in this car where you can use a British tool. Cut. In this case, 5/16 BSF. Now these original jets, needles and seats rather, these original needles and seats have a nice piece of gauze on the top of them. And it's too bad that the new jets, whether they're gross jets or replacement for these, it's too bad those don't have that screen on the top. So it's always necessary to filter your gasoline on the way in. Especially critical. We always replace these with gross jets. We're not going to remove the fast idle or the idle screw. In this case, we'll simply wash the carburetor body. But there are a number of ports and holes here on this carburetor, side to side and top to bottom, that we should explain. The gasoline comes in here, sometimes on other models over here. In this case, it's coming in from the front of the car into the needle and seat hole so that the float bowl can have the correct amount of gasoline. This is the jet tube. It goes up into here, crosses with this guy here, so that gasoline is available at this hole simply by creating a little bit of a vacuum here, which is done with this hole as it shoots down through the inside of the carburetor into a drilling just inside the throat. Cut. And this choke hole is located well forward, right in on this angle, well forward of the butterfly. There's a little air bleed hole here that's drilled down and across and becomes evident right here on the inside of the throat. It is essential that that hole is clear, and that if safety clean, for instance, the spray carburetor cleaner is shot into the one hole, that it comes out the other, which it does. We're sure that this guy is clear. That hole is essential. If that hole is plugged, then this guy will always be pulled over on rich because there's no vacuum to move this piston out. We have an air bleed hole here receiving fresh air from a drilling inside the throat, and another hole drilled on the back side that comes out on the underside of the carburetor here, which is this air for the CO emissions. We have a spring-loaded poppet valve here, which has been soldered shut. Always heat it from the underside, blow the solder in on the top, close down this poppet valve. This is the extent of the carburetor, except for the jet. There are no replacement jets. The hole in the jet must be 100 thousandths. Since there's no replacements, it's necessary to fix these. And that's the last step in a complete carburetor rebuild. Cut. After the jet has been rebuilt, then it's a relatively simple matter to begin the reassembly. Use a lot of grease, use a lot of oil. Use grease on threads, makes everything go together much more easily. Whether one is using the original style of needle and seat, which in this case seems to be fitting back. Oh, no wonder we've got it on the wrong side. Oh, there's always some humor in these films, or at least there should be. That's my humor for today. Maybe there will be more. Our floats fit back on. And the distance, again, to check, is between here and the top of the float with the correct amount. Cut. That's 5/8 of an inch from here to the top, or 16.5 millimeters, or Jim Eppinga from University Motors prefers to work with the floats until the seam lines on the float are parallel with the bottom of the body. Then, using a liberal amount of grease, get the gasket nice and gooey so he'll come off again if you have to go back inside later today or a year from now. Fits on easily. Float roll bottom and our screws. Always ensure that there's free play in the piece that you're refitting. That yes, it can jiggle back and forth, it's not jammed up. And tighten all the screws. Cut. Of course, snug all the screws before you finally tighten them. Over-tightening is not necessary. Our float bowl is attached. Our air bleed valve coming in from the side, again use grease on the gasket. Our air bleed valve, which controls the carbon monoxide emissions, fits on the side with a lot of grease. Cut. These screws are quickly tightened. Now we can fit our piston. Ensuring that the tag on the piston here fits into the slot on the body, where it is essential that those air bleed holes be in the correct position. Cut. And when refitting the top of the carburetor, it is essential that the lines here are on top of each other, Then using red grease on our screws, our new 1032 by half-inch screws, grease to ensure that they'll come out again at some point in the future, and nice new heads, so that getting the float bowl, rather the suction chamber lid, removed isn't the hassle that it might be otherwise. Looks nicer too. Cut. And again, all the screws we've gotten snug prior to getting them tight. We can fill the suction chamber now with oil and press in our cap, which should press in with extreme resistance, extreme difficulty. Now it's time to fit the automatic choke. The new gasket or the old gasket you'll want to thoroughly smear with grease, and then place the gasket onto the carburetor body. The automatic choke is then pretty easily fitted. Although one has to keep fussing with the position of the throttle to make sure that does not interfere with the fitting of the body. The screws are brought in loosely, and after making sure that everything is free, they can be drawn up slowly until they are as tight as you can get them. If this choke body comes loose, gasoline drips out of the joint between the carburetor body and the choke, and will drip right onto the exhaust or the catalytic converter. Our black plastic insulator is easily fitted. Again, here are our alignment lines on top, so that when we go to fit our heat mass, the hole here, the tag in the heat mass, we can line up easily with the tag here, and when we rotate it, we have the correct alignment, the correct marks here. Cut. Start. These screws can be fitted once the basic alignment is done. Our body, of course, can take up any position and hook onto the hoses that are either in place or the substitute hoses. But what's important is that the heat mass, that part with the bimetal strip, is in fact correctly aligned, and by all three alignment marks being in line. Only in the dead of winter, when it's so terribly, terribly cold, should the heat mass be rotated clockwise as seen from the front, and then only by as much as 1/4 of an inch at the most. Now our carburetor is complete. We've replaced the diaphragm, the O-ring at the bottom of the piston, and the needle. We've taken care of our emission control device here. In fact, here by closing it off all the way, although there are O-rings inside it to change. We've made sure that all of our pieces are working properly. The automatic choke, we've boiled the heat mass, taken the choke assembly apart, cleaned it, surfaced it. We've used our trick with the ball and the drill to reduce the jet back to 0.999, and we're all set to reinstall it on the car. Cut. The Stromberg carburetor may be the problem with your MG. Cut. The Stromberg carburetor is an essential part to your car running correctly, but it's only one of four. Remember that in any tune-up, you must attend to the emission control devices, evaporative loss system, positive crankcase ventilation and exhaust. You must attend to the engine itself, its compression, whether there's a hot thermostat. In these, it's essential to have a hot thermostat. You've got to run 195 degrees, essential. You've got to attend to the ignition system. Finally, when those systems are all in place, the fuel system and the carburation system need to be worked with. This carburetor does four things. It starts the car by enriching the mixture. It allows the car to run at any number of different speeds because we can vary the throttle. At those various speeds, the piston on the inside rises up. The shock absorber in the top of the piston allows the unit to enrich the mixture, add acceleration. We can control the CO emissions by the bleed screw on the side. The Stromberg carburetor is easily repaired, easily worked with, easily adjusted, but everything has to be clean and it has to be correct. If you follow these simple procedures, your car will run infinitely better than it runs now. Tools and supplies necessary to rebuild a carburetor are really pretty simple. We've got a 1/2-inch wrench for taking off the heat mass, 5/16 British wrench or socket for removing the gross jet with the needle and seat at the bottom, several different screwdrivers, one shaped unusually to get down inside the grub screw on the piston, our Stromberg tool, which is absolutely invaluable, a scraper for removing the gaskets, our special tool made out of the brake line, and the hammer for driving the small brass adjuster piece out of the piston. Vice grips and a 5/16 socket for tightening up the axle on the inside of the automatic choke. Another 1/2-inch wrench, just in case the first one wasn't good enough. The dentist tool, that's what we call it, a dentist tool. Wonderful piece of chisel for getting that heat mass and the water jacket separate. The 11/16 socket for knocking out the bottom of the float bowl. And a nice long, sharp Phillips screwdriver, a number 2. And that's the extent of the tools. Supplies, I've got carburetor cleaner, WD-40, our famous red grease, any grease will do, oil, some rags. Nothing that you don't have at home. As the heat mass warms up, it turns clockwise. We want to calibrate this simply by putting it into a can of water, boiling the water, and the heat mass will move as far clockwise That's a nice rolling boil. Now we can pull the heat mass out with the pliers and mark it. Cut. Quickly secure the heat mass and make a mark in it that is absolutely clear and definable that you can see much later on. Cut. To correctly, this is easy for me to say, to correctly what? Cut. Because the jet is not available, we have to repair the jet. a 5/32 punch, place the carburetor body on top, place into the jet a 5/32 ball, cut. And use a 3/16 socket punch on the top, cut. Seat that ball a couple of times. That'll roll the top edge of that jet. Now that jet is much smaller than 100 thousandths. We can place the carburetor body now into the vise. Hold it in such a manner that we don't damage anything on the underside. Take a number 39 drill, a number 39, that's .099, which we'll not go through now, but we've opened it up to .099, or virtually 100 thousandths. That's how to fix this jet. Cut. The choke very often has the bottom cut. The choke often has the freeze plug missing at the bottom. This is 5/8. Simply buy a 5/8 freeze plug. If you can't find it in the trough of the frame right underneath the carburetor, and go ahead and seat this in with the hammer, or certainly in the case of an existing one, make sure that you really clobber these guys well and make sure that these freeze plugs stay in place. Cut. The surface of the underside of the choke often becomes warped, and if it becomes warped, then gasoline can pass between the two orifices. So, using a piece of glass, in this case a piece of steel, we sand this boy. You can see that he's warped. We're picking him up on the edges, but the middle is not clear. Always change its direction as much as possible so you don't keep sanding in the same direction. Rotate it. We've still got a little bit of a section on the inside which is not correct. Getting this mating surface parallel is important so the choke does not come on by itself there. We're starting to pick up all of it here. A couple more passes, maybe do a better part of our paper. Now he's nice and shiny all over. Of course, we're going to have to spray him extremely heavily with a carburetor cleaner and blow him out with an airline to make sure that none of this little bit of grit and aluminum gets down inside this jet. Cut. The automatic choke, when it's operating properly, should move as freely as this. And once this air piston is moved over, like this, then, which is very hard to hold, then this should be able to move freely. Additionally, this cam here has to move freely on the finger. Very common to find any or of all these things buggered up. The screw holes here are 832. In fact, they're really not, but 832 will work. And it may be necessary to buy an 832 screw longer than the original screw which fit in here to catch the threads right at the bottom of the holes to hold the heat mass and black plastic insulator tight. This is the corresponding hole to the hole in the carburetor body that places the vacuum on this kick piston. And this kick piston should have a very strong spring and should move with no difficulty whatsoever rearward, because every time you turn the car off, every time you completely lose manifold vacuum, this kick piston falls into its subbore and pulls the choke all the way on. It's all the way on now. This happy little boy here, this piece of plastic covers up a drilling on the underside which must be used for some other purpose. Always make sure he goes back in, although it doesn't hurt anything if he's out. Our spring-loaded push button here must be operating properly. Sometimes when the car has been too hot, the outer ring has melted and interferes with the free movement of this push button. Sometimes all that's necessary to do is crunch with a pair of pliers or a pair of side cutters, crunch some of this outer housing off if it's become hot and lipped and prevents the free movement. On full choke, the cam is rotated all the way clockwise, the finger is rotated all the way clockwise, and the throttle here against the cam here forces the throttle disc to remain open. Once that choke comes off, this plunger goes in far more deeply and the throttle disc is much further closed, slowing the idle down. This cam has any number of steps on it, perhaps 8 or so, which can allow the carburetor to be open further and further and further until it's all the way full open when it's on full choke up here. Cut. The spring-loaded screw here controls that fast idle. You can see by the operation of the plates here. This is the throttle plate here and on this finger at the bottom. That's the throttle plate. The position of that throttle plate is controlled by the position of this spring-loaded screw. When you're on full choke, this screw should be screwed down until you are idling at about 16 to 1800 RPMs on full choke when you're fully coldest. As this boy steps down, he's going to run slower and slower right at the point of startup. But the maximum RPM you should ever have is 1600. And that 1600 might occur here. The fastest should be 1600. To set this gap correctly, it should be 95 thousandths. But if you cannot set it, or these pieces have been bent to the point where you're not sure where they are, then simply turn the idle screw until you're idling at 1600 RPM fastest. You have to work between the finger here and the throttle disc to find out where it's idling the fastest. Then set it to 1600. Once the choke has come all the way off, this is still controlling the speed of idle. But this screw, the idle screw, controls the position of this assembly. The very last step is to slacken off this nut with a 3/8 wrench. Use a small screwdriver on the inside and rotate this until you're idling at about 800 RPM. Make all further adjustments then off the spring-loaded screw. Again, as the car warms up, this screw should be adjusted to give you a maximum fast idle of 16 to 1800 RPM. Then when the car is fully warm, the choke is all the way off, adjust this screw so that you're idling at 900 RPM. Lock it down. Make all further adjustment off the fast idle screw. Cut. Adjusting the mixture while the engine is running is easily done, either by lifting the piston with a screwdriver ever so slightly, or unscrewing the damper at the top, angling it, picking the piston up and down. But it's most easily done with the air cleaner off on the inside tune-up, simply by lifting the piston with a screwdriver, a dentist tool. But whatever you do, don't stick your finger down here because it distorts the airflow, gives you false reading. The Stromberg tool is invaluable for adjusting the idle. Rotate the outer part until the little tiny pins line up with the piston. and push the Allen wrench down inside. As you turn the Allen wrench clockwise, it enriches the mixture. You can remember that easily because as every minute goes by, you ought to have more money in your pocket. Time is money, therefore clockwise is rich. Silly little ditties to try to remember this stuff. You eventually hit a point, and I have here, where it's all the way rich. You should never have to have it in that position. Midway, which is about 2 full turns off richest, is a good place to start. Cut. As you're adjusting the idle RPM and the idle mixture, as you lift the piston ever so slightly, it leans out the mixture. Look for a change in RPM when you lift the piston. You want a rise of perhaps 50, 75 RPMs as you lift the piston higher and higher, and then you want the idle RPM to fall off. So as you lift this piston off where it normally sits and lift it high, you should judge a change in RPM of 50 to 75. If the idle falls off immediately, as you lift the piston and the idle falls off immediately, it's too lean. Enrichen it by turning the tool clockwise. If, on the other hand, and more commonly, if the mixture is too lean, cut. If, on the other hand, the mixture is too rich and the idle RPMs continue to climb, the faster, If, on the other hand, the idle RPMs continue to rise, the higher you lift the piston, it's because it's too rich and it's necessary to turn the adjusting tool anti-clockwise, pushing the needle further into the jet, making the mixture leaner. The perfect solution, the perfect operating condition, is to have the idle RPM rise 50 to 75 RPM as you lift the piston. No more, no less. Cut. There are 4 parts to any tune-up: the condition of the emission control equipment, the engine, the ignition, and the carburation. The tune-up is only as good as all its component parts. The Stromberg carburetor is only one. It is true that certain problems are found within the Stromberg carburetor, and the problem you might have with your car might be the Stromberg carburetor. But don't lay all the problem and all the blame of a faulty running MG simply on the Stromberg carburetor. It will do the job. It's designed to do the job. It's not necessary to fit a Weber. It's not necessary to fit a hand choke. It will work, and you can do it. Cut. If there's some part of rebuilding this Stromberg carburetor that makes you uncomfortable, you don't want to do the automatic choke, if you don't want to do the whole carburetor at all, simply send the entire carburetor to University Motors for a wonderful rebuild. It's about a $200 job. Comes back to you with a new needle and seat. Everything's all been cleaned up, shined up, and it works wonderfully well. I'm John Twist of University Motors, and I'm here to show you how to rebuild your Stromberg carburetor. Cut. If you feel confident rebuilding your Stromberg carburetor, perhaps you'll feel confident rebuilding other parts of your cars. Send for some more video information. Cut. If you feel confident rebuilding your Stromberg carburetor, and you should because it's so easy, cleanliness and consistency are the main considerations. If you feel confident rebuilding this unit, perhaps you'll feel confident rebuilding other units in your car. Send to University Motors or watch for our new videos.